Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, wow, I just finished playing one of the greatest JRPGs I think I'll play in my entire lifetime. Very few series can reach the height of Trails. Not because of sheer fanboyism, I am actually quite critical of the franchise. It's straight up because no series in gaming is doing what Trails is doing. In an industry obsessed with reboots, remakes, remasters, restarting everything, Trails is built different because Trails is about long-form storytelling to the point where you would not be wrong to call Trails Into Reverie the Smash Bros of JRPGs because everyone from the series is here, and it's absolutely incredible in the terms of long-term payoff, what they have pulled off with this game. And here I am after playing 8 JRPGs in 1 year to catch up to talk about this one game here today, Trails Into Reverie, which I was purely invested in on just namesake and word of mouth alone. Everyone I talked to who had leapt ahead and played this game had said this is absolutely one of the most incredible JRPGs that they've played. So off I went. I played Sky 1 through 3, Zero, Azure, Cold Steel 1 through 4. Most of these games are massive RPGs, and it was a journey unlike anything I've been on in gaming. For Reverie to actually deliver on all the promise is astounding, given my personal hype for the game. But from the top-notch turn-based combat to the mysterious narrative, it is a god-tier JRPG and absolutely fits into my top 3 favorite games of this year. Does that sound good to you? All right, let's get into it. If you're new here and you're into day one reviews, I know we've had a couple as of late. Think it'll be dry for a little bit going into July, but if it's something you're keeping an eye out for, consider subscribing. You know we love talking about JRPGs here. So let's start off with the top level conversation, and we're going to drill really deep into this game without spoiling anything as well, visually or audibly. You don't have to worry about that if you're a long-term series fan. But if you are, what are you doing here? You're probably picking it up anyway. So first question you may be asking, if you are a newcomer, can I get into Reverie right off the rip? No, you cannot. You will not have fun here. I'm sorry. I hate to say it. I mean, the gameplay is great. You will have fun, I should say, but you are not going to know at all what is going on here. For those looking for the full experience, it's a really interesting question because I think you can begin at Trails from Zero, which was just ported to PS4 and Switch last year. But to reap the benefits of Zero and some of Trails' longest standing, best characters that remain relevant now and into the future, you're going to want to play the Sky trilogy. I'll just say this. Cold Steel 1 through 4 is not enough. Please at least play Zero and Azure. These games are fantastic unto themselves. If you end up saying, you know what, I don't want more of this, you've just played 2 of the best JRPGs in the business, that would be enough for me. But if you want the whole package, the whole story here, you gotta at least start with these games and go through, yes, even Cold Steel. And I promise you this, it's this kind of series. If you end up liking any of these games, you're going to end up going back. You can tell me all you want. No, I'm not going to do that. Look, I've been there. My friends have been there. Anyone who's been introduced to the series has been there. Nah, I think I'm done after this for a little bit. There is nothing like a Trails game. And once you're done, you're going to want more. I'm telling you right now. Not because of cliffhangers. Again, there's nothing like Trails. Have I sold you on the series yet? Great. Let's talk more about Reverie itself. Following the events of Cold Steel 4, a lot of the continent of Zemuria is facing unrest, specifically in Crossbell. Now, you're going to walk the path of not 1, but 3 main characters in this game. Reen, Cold Steel's main protagonist, Lloyd Bannings, who is the main protagonist of Zero and Azure, and then the masked vigilante known as C throughout the Trails to walk. Now, you can choose to tackle the story however you wish, but certain parts will bar progress until other components of the story are completed, given their more integrated nature. Each group is joined by familiar counterparts, so Lloyd is going to be with the SSS, as you'd expect. Reen is going to be with new Class 7 and some of old Class 7, but C's group is all entirely new. Joining C is Nadi and Swin. These are brand new characters that are introduced through a book in the Trails world that the game does expect you to read. This is kind of where Trails, for me, takes an L because I don't know what they're expecting. The book is like 200 pages. I skimmed through it, got the general premise. I think you can do the same. Otherwise, yeah, these characters I think are some of the more weaker ones of the entire game series, but they have their moments that make them worthwhile. But really who steals the show here is Lapis. Lapis is like the glue to this unlikely family and really takes the story up a notch. So C's story, all of their stories are incredibly interesting, but this group is the more fresh one of new characters that you're trying to figure out and understand more and more. Because of the way the story's told as you're flipping from narrative to narrative, it actually has a way better pace than really any prior Trails game. This is something I've been very critical of. Y'all have seen some of my older Trails videos possibly, whether it be Sky 1, 2, 3, we talked about 0. We actually never got around to talking about Azure here because we were talking about a number of other things, but I've always been critical of Trails' just self-indulgent level writing where sometimes I get it, I love the world, I love the focus on all the characters, but sometimes we can do it in stride with gameplay. There's ways to move it forward in meaningful ways without adding multiple hours to the play clock. Trails is always about long-term payoff, but sometimes I do think it hurts getting people into the series when these games could be having some of the fat trimmed off of them through edit passes. But I say all of that because this game doesn't really have that problem. Trails Into Reverie is about a 40-ish hour game, which is really great for a JRPG in my eyes, and it has very little fat on it at all. And all that additional stuff is just that, additional stuff, which we'll talk about later. So the pace is dramatically improved as you're zipping from character to character and sort of narrowing down what this mystery that's going on in Zemuria is. To me, that's the most compelling part of the story is I went through almost the entire game just wondering what's going on here. It is such a well-guarded narrative, and I gotta put some respect on it. The way they inch things forward, keeping it very intriguing without really telling me enough to know and making even a good prediction on what's going on is truly impressive. The presentation itself also gets a boost with cutscenes that I just wish we could get more of. I understand Falcom is a much smaller company than people understand, but they add so much to the game in the terms of what is typically very stagnant scenes from the older games. It is such a leap forward, but also an improvement in this game is the villains. Now, while I still take issue with this series, we'll say reservation on doing some darker things and really pulling some punches oftentimes, I have to say that the villains in this game are fantastic because it leads to a much more personal tale with plenty of depth compared to what we've seen in previous Trails villains. Typically, it's about a faction, a group of people, a cause, a philosophy, and that's interesting into itself. But Reverie is different because there is a personal level to this tale that, of course, as always, I'm not going to ruin for you, but to me, that emotional level, I mean, Maddie's eyes did well up towards the end of this game, man. Didn't get the tears out, but I felt the waterworks starting to come in, and that's a tough thing for a game to do, but that to me shows just how much emotion and how much buildup this game was packed in with, and it's just, again, a testament to the phenomenal narrative here. Its ability to expand upon its villain character alongside such a massive cast where Falcom undoubtedly had to pick and choose who gets the spotlight is just some of the most beautiful writing I've ever got to watch unfold. Everyone manages to have a moment without it really feeling forced, and understandably, some major characters like even Old Class 7, you know, Elliot, Emma, so on and so forth, do fall into side character roles, as they should. You know, for me, heading into this game, I had a sour taste in my mouth. If people watch my content, they already know how I feel, but Cold Steel 4 really rubbed me the wrong way. It was such a big buildup. I loved Cold Steel 3. I thought 2, 1 even in Cold Steel. I thought all these games were actually pretty great. Like, I had no strong problems with it, but Cold Steel 4 was one of the most padded JRPGs I've ever played. And for me, going into Reverie, it kind of soured me on the series for a little bit, but this brought me back. It brought the love back. It really restored the faith. So I just got to say that from the writing quality, it has been a massive improvement in what I think was a pretty steep decline in Cold Steel, even 3, which I liked, and 4. 3 was carried by a lot of fan service, but 4 just, I cannot excuse it. So Reverie on a writing front, massive, massive improvement. If you're an old school Trails fan, you liked Sky, you liked 0, Azure, it's more of that style of writing here. That means, yes, they even get rid of the fan servicey stuff that you saw in Cold Steel 3 and 4. For the most part, it manages to find its way in here. It's Trails, so you just know it's going to come with the territory. But we'll talk about mini games. It's off to the side. Don't worry. In conclusion, what I'll just say is there are some plot points in Reverie that I think are starting to fly a bit close to the sun in the terms of hey, this is gonna start nearing convoluted if we're not careful here. I trust Falcom as fantastic writers, but it's something to be aware of, that this narrative will make your head spin a little bit. I think they explain it all well by the end of it, but it is getting to that point of, wow, there's a lot of layers here. Is why I said, if you have not played any of the previous games, you're going to be so beyond lost, and you're probably by nature going to want to go back and just play them to understand what you spent $60 on. So in conclusion, Trails into Reverie was a game that once I finished up, I couldn't walk away from. I immediately jumped into the end game, just kept playing, and I was left thinking about it for days and days and days. Like, it just hasn't been able to shake off of me. It's an incredible experience. All of that long-term build up, well worthwhile. Now, that's a lot said on the story without really getting into the narrative plot points. Hopefully that conveys to you just how I was feeling about this game. With that, let's move into gameplay, because even if you don't like the story in Trails, it is such a fun game to play, man. Trails into Reverie is a goated turn-based RPG, and I'm talking goated, capital G-O-A-T. It is so fire with its many moving parts, crafts, S-crafts, orders, magic spells, and it's all thanks to the wonderful build crafting you can do here, from your standard equipment all the way up to your quartz, which think of your spells, your abilities, stat boosts, as well as your master quartz, which serves as, we'll say, your main class. I don't want to make it sound too simple, but think of it like your thief, your rogue, and so on and so forth, although it goes deeper than that, because each master quartz has a very unique passive ability. And then there are sub quartz, that's like your subclass. So it's a very deeply complex building system that allows you to make some wild combinations and gives you complete autonomy over almost any battle. One thing that got me frustrated with Cold Steel 4 and 3 is there were certain points in battles where you would be botting an enemy and they'd be like in the middle of the fight, now you've done enough damage, they'd restore their break meter, and off we'd go to continue fighting, because otherwise I'd wipe the floor with them. This game still has it, but it lets you play with a lot more power where you can almost override that, which I really enjoyed. I feel like games should reward me. If my build is absolutely disgusting and I can wipe a major boss out in less than 5 minutes, let me do that. Reverie lets you do that. It feels so good when you find the right quartz, the right gems, and you're starting to slot them in, and you see those numbers going up, and then you feel it in the gameplay. It is one of the most fun build crafting games that you can have. And that's so impressive, because when you look at all it's done narratively, the gameplay has no right to be this good, but it is truly that fantastic. So that's what kept me in the end game, because of that Smash Bros. Like, everyone's here. I was getting interesting parties, putting them together, putting interesting quartz into them, master quartz, and just really throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, and doing dream party compositions as a Trails fan that I never thought would happen. Even in the story, they just have those moments where I'm like, why are these characters together? This is amazing. And you've likely already noticed by this point, why is this gameplay fast forwarded? Trails is the first series I personally experienced, and I'm sure it's not the first one to do it. It has what's called turbo mode. Now, one of my complaints about Cold Steel, it really is the fact that every animation is in like half speed. It truly is. Not because if you play in turbo mode and you turn it off, oh wow, this is slow by comparison. Like, just the animations in general are very, very slow. Now, I know in the next two Trails games, they've overhauled some things, and apparently it picks up quite a bit where you don't really need turbo mode, but I still find it to be a boon I'm quite thankful for here in Reverie, and made full use of it, because I think the gameplay and the amount of battles you go through, it's so rip-roaring that kind of sifting through a handful of battles really quickly feels pretty good. And also, if you're on PS5, you can get 4 times turbo mode, so you can go even quicker if you so desire. For me, it's a little too quick for my blood. 2 times mode is just fine. You can still track the action and respond to things just right. But truthfully, just a phenomenal gameplay experience. Not only are you going to be running around all of Zemuria, you're going to be running around what's called the Reverie Corridor. Again, narratively, I will not explain what's going on here, but pretty much this place is, if you've played, we'll say, Sky 3, it's like Phantasma, but massively improved. And if you haven't played any Trails games, you're like, well, what is Phantasma? Think of maybe Tartarus if Atlas actually listened to their fans with the remake and made proper changes to it. So you're going to go through what are called stratums. You're going to explore them, and in there you're going to fight enemies, complete missions, and get upgrades through phantasmal shards. Now, these phantasmal shards can be spent at the central core, and you can unlock new upgrades like support slots to add different party characters to your team. You'll be able to unlock new Brave Point slots. You'll be able to buy items from here if you're short on them, and so on and so forth. Mini games can be purchased from here, but also as you're exploring the Reverie Corridor, you're going to unlock a plethora of things. You're going to find sealing stones that'll give you items. Sometimes they'll let you unlock what's called daydreams. Think of these like, again, going back to Sky 3, think of them like doors. Remember in Sky 3, there were these doors you would go through that'd be these visual novel-like sections there where the writing really went off. They've been improved here. Some a little long, most of them pretty respectable length with combat in them, which I think helps the pacing out of these stories. So you have these daydreams. You have mini games here. There are some like Pom Pom Party, which was introduced in Azure, but you also have ones like Vantage Masters, which was introduced in Cold Steel 3. Then you got wild ones like going to the beach and having what's called intimate moments with your party members. I'm just like, oh man. Here's the Cold Steel ass part of the game is how I like to put it. But that's there. There are plenty of other mini games that you can take part in, which I think is a lot of fun. And then on top of that, there are trials. So there are unique combat trials with different party compositions and enemies to fight up against, which are really cool, like Lloyd and Kurt teaming up. Why not? And you're fighting Risha. Like, okay, cool, let's do it. That's awesome. But this place is also the host of phenomenal endgame content once you wrap things up. So yeah, just from top to bottom, wonderful game. You may be listening to this review not knowing what I'm talking about or knowing what I'm talking about and saying, all right, you got any complaints, Maddie? Outside of what I said with the narrative, maybe flying a bit too close to the sun with some convoluted elements and not going dark enough when clearly the story's demanding it and some of the characters are demanding it, I think those are nitpicks. But one true complaint I have, this soundtrack is way too mundane for how fire this game is. I'm sorry, I gotta say it. I gotta come for the composers here, because the Trails soundtrack from Sky all the way up to, I'm gonna say probably like Cold Steel 2 was so memorable, was so good. Truly, I think the line was drawn with Cold Steel 1 was so incredible. Like it's the defining element to my Spotify playlist. And then just Reverie is so, I've never experienced a JRPG that's so magnificent with a soundtrack that is so passive and sits in the background with 1,000,001 instruments happening at once, where there's no flow, there's no rhythm. It just feels junky. I hate to say it. I know it's mean, but it's not very good. There are tracks that feel like a blind squirrel found a nut that are quite good, but for the heights this soundtrack has reached, this feels like my opportunity to communicate. Y'all gotta get it together on the soundtrack front. This series was way too raw on the sound front to be sounding like this now. There was one point in the story where the music was so bad, I took a track from an old game, put it on my phone, and turned up the volume and said, this is my soundtrack for this moment here, because what I'm listening to is legitimately not epic at all for what's happening here in the story. That's the point I went to. Fortunately, with some of the higher moments towards the very end game, the soundtrack is great. But there are points that I'm just like, man, what happened to like Afternoon and Crossbell? What happened to all of these great songs that we've enjoyed from Falcom Sound Team JDK? What happened? And this game, I think, just underscores all of that. So I gotta go ahead and take him to task. I'm sorry. But ladies and gentlemen, otherwise, Trails into Reverie is a god tier JRPG that I'm continuing to spend time in. I'm gonna go for the platinum trophy. It requires another playthrough, but I don't care. This game is that good. And ladies and gentlemen, I recommend, if you are a Trails fan, please pick this up. If you are intrigued by this, it's kind of weird to say this in a review, never done this before, go pick up Trails from Zero. Try the series out. Yes, it's a totally different art style, but Trails from Zero is my favorite in the entire series. I don't know if Reverie is going to eclipse it. I need time to think on that, but right now Zero is my favorite in the series and one of my favorite JRPGs of all time. It is truly wonderful, very human story, and doesn't go near what a lot of these JRPGs do with the god figures and all this crap. It's so good. So if you're interested in what I've talked about today and you want to begin your Trails journey, start with 0, and you're going to naturally want that context with some other things, and you can either go forward all the way up to Reverie, and probably by that point you're going to want to go back to Sky. It's a journey unlike any other. No one in the industry is doing what Falcom's doing. Put some of the respect on their name. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, those are my thoughts on Trails Into Reverie. Let me know your thoughts down below. And with that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next Retro Rebound. Peace out.